I'm investigating the story of Goatman, and he is real. It all started with a Reddit thread. I was scrolling through on a sleep late one night, as I often do, when I came across a post titled, "The Goatman of Lover's Lane." The title alone was enough to pique my interest. But as I read through the story, I felt a chill run down my spine. The post was written by a user who claimed to have grown up in a small town in Maryland near a place called Lover's Lane, a secluded stretch of road that was popular with teenagers looking for a little privacy. According to the story, the area was haunted by a creature known as the Goatman, a half-man, half-goat monster that roamed the woods, preying on anyone foolish enough to venture too close. The user described an encounter they'd had as a teenager when they and their friends had gone to Lover's Lane. On a dare, they'd heard strange noises in the woods, guttural growls, the sound of hooves on the ground. And then they'd seen a tall humanoid figure with the head of a goat, its eyes glowing in the dark. They'd fled in terror, but not before one of their friends had disappeared, never to be seen again. The story was chilling, but what really caught my attention were the comments. Dozens of people had replied, sharing their own stories of encounters with the Goatman. Some claimed to have seen him in the woods. Others said they'd heard his eerie cries in the night. A few even claimed to have lost friends or family members to the creature. I'd always been fascinated by urban legends and cryptids, but this was different. The Goatman wasn't just a story, he was real, and I was determined to prove it. I spent the next few days researching the Goatman, scouring the internet for any information I could find. The legend seemed to have its roots in the 1970s, when a series of gruesome murders had taken place near Lover's Lane. The victims had all been teenagers, their bodies found mutilated as if they'd been attacked by an animal. The police had never caught the killer, and the case had gone cold. But the locals had their own theory. They believed the murders had been the work of the Goatman, a creature that had been haunting the woods for decades. Some said he was the spirit of a man who had been wronged. Others claimed he was a demon summoned by a local cult. Whatever he was dangerous. I decided to go to Maryland and investigate for myself. I packed my camera, a voice recorder, and a few other pieces of equipment and set off for Lover's Lane. The town was small and quiet, with a population of just a few thousand people. The locals were friendly, but when I mentioned the Goatman, their demeanor changed. They became nervous, evasive, and some outright refused to talk about it. I managed to find a few people who were willing to share their stories. The one man, a retired police officer, told me about the murders in the 70s. "We ever found the killer," he said, his voice low. "But I'll tell you this, those kids weren't killed by any animal. Whatever did that, it wasn't natural." Another local, an elderly woman who had lived in the town her whole life, told me about a legend she'd heard as a child. "They say the Goatman was once a farmer," she said. "He was a good man, but he had a dark secret. He made a deal with the devil, and when the time came to pay his debt, he refused. The devil cursed him, turned him into a monster. Now he roams the woods looking for souls to take." I thanked her for the information and headed to Lover's Lane. The road was narrow and overgrown with trees pressing in on either side. It was easy to see why teenagers would come here. It was secluded, private, the perfect place to escape from the world. I parked my car and started walking down the road, my camera in hand. The woods were quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves under my feet. But as I walked, I started to feel like I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was no one there. Then I heard it, a low guttural growl coming from the trees. I froze, my heart pounding. The sound was deep, almost like a dog's growl. But there was something off about it. It was too loud, too resonant, like it was coming from something much larger. I turned toward the sound, my camera raised, and peered into the trees. At first I didn't see anything, but then in the shadows I saw movement. Something was there, something big. I took a step closer, my hands trembling, and then I saw it. A figure standing just inside the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with the body of a man and the head of a goat. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I raised my camera and snapped a picture, the flash illuminating the creature. For a split second, it let out a deafening roar, and charged at me, its hooves pounding against the ground. I turned and ran, my heart racing. As the creature chased me through the woods, I could hear it behind me, its breath hot on my neck, its growls echoing in my ears. I didn't dare look back. I burst out of the trees and onto the road with my legs burning with exertion. I could see my car up ahead, and I sprinted toward it, fumbling with my keys. I threw open the door and jumped inside, slamming it shut just as the creature reached the car. It slammed into the side of the vehicle, its claws scraping against the metal. I could see its face through the window, its glowing eyes staring into mine. It let out another roar, then turned and disappeared into the woods. I sat there for a long time, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The Goatman was real, and he was more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. I drove back to town and checked into a motel, my mind racing. I needed to process what had happened to figure out what to do next. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go. I had to find out more about the Goatman to understand what he was and why he was here. The next day, I went to the local library and started digging through old newspapers and records. I found articles about the murders in the 70s, but there was little information about the Goatman himself. It was as if the town had tried to erase him from history. But then I found something. A journal tucked away in the archives. It belonged to a man named Samuel Harker, a farmer who had lived in the area in the early 1900s. The journal was filled with entries about strange occurrences on his farm. Animals disappearing, crops withering, strange noises in the night. But the last entry was what caught my attention. I have made a terrible mistake, it read. I sought power, and I found it, but at a cost. The devil has come for me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the words. The Goatman wasn't just a legend, he was real, and he had once been a man. I spent the next few days trying to find out more about Samuel Harker, but there was little information available. It was as if he had disappeared from history, just like the Goatman himself. But I wasn't ready to give up. I decided to go back to Lover's Lane to see if I could find any more clues this time. I brought a friend with me, a local named Jake who had grown up hearing stories about the Goatman. We parked the car and started walking down the road, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The woods were quiet, but I could feel the tension in the air, like something was waiting for us. Then we heard it, the growl, deep and guttural, coming from the trees. Jake froze, his eyes wide with fear. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the Goatman." I raised my camera and started recording, my hands trembling. The growl grew louder, and then we saw him, the Goatman, standing in the shadows, his glowing eyes fixed on us. He charged at us, his hooves pounding against the ground, and we turned and ran. But this time I wasn't just running away, I was running toward the truth. We made it back to the car, the Goatman close behind us. As we drove away, I looked back and saw him standing in the road, his eyes glowing in the darkness. I knew then that I had found what I was looking for. The Goatman was real, and he was more than just a monster. He was a man cursed by his own greed and ambition, a man who had become a legend. But I also knew that I couldn't stop here. The Goatman was still out there, still haunting the woods, and I had to find a way to stop him. The story isn't over yet, but one thing is certain. The Goatman is real, and he's waiting.